Welcome back. Today we're diving into one of the most important players in any clinical trial, the sponsor. Now, whether you're working in medical affairs, clinical operations, or serving as an investigator at a research site, you've probably heard the term sponsor 100 times. But what does a sponsor actually do beyond just funding the trial? A lot more than you think. Sponsors aren't just cutting checks and waiting for the results. They are the architects of the trial, the ones responsible for making sure the study is not only scientifically sound, but also ethical, compliant, and high quality from start to finish. So, in this tutorial, we're going to break down the sponsor's responsibilities, not just from a theoretical angle, but in a way that helps you connect the dots to your daily work. Here's what we'll cover. First, we'll clarify the sponsor's role and obligations as outlined in ICH E6 and why this matters across functions. Then, we'll walk through quality management systems, how sponsors build a framework to ensure every step of the trial meets the right standards for safety, ethics, and reliability. Next up is risk-based monitoring, a shift away from the old-school model of endless site visits to a smarter, more data-driven approach. You'll learn what this means for you, whether you're on-site or working in the background. We'll also explore how sponsors handle the selection of investigators, because choosing the right sites and people is more than just checking credentials. It's about risk mitigation, recruitment potential, and trial success. And finally, we'll discuss data handling and record keeping. Because in clinical research, it's not just what you discover that matters. It's how well you document the process. This tutorial is for anyone who wants to better understand how trials are truly managed, how oversight happens behind the scenes, and how every decision from the sponsor's side influences the entire study lifecycle. So whether you're designing protocols, supporting sites, engaging investigators, or managing systems, this is your chance to see the full picture. Let's get started. Who exactly is the sponsor in a clinical trial? According to the ICH E6 guideline, the sponsor is defined as an individual, company, institution, or organization which takes responsibility for the initiation, management, and/or financing of a clinical trial. So in simple terms, if you're the one starting the trial, funding it, and ensuring it gets done according to good clinical practice, you're the sponsor. Now in practice, this role is overwhelmingly filled by one major group, the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry. In fact, according to global data from the World Health Organization's ICTRP database and clinicaltrials.gov, over 80% of interventional drug and device trials are sponsored directly by industry. Some estimates put it even higher, closer to 85% in developed regions like the US, EU, and Japan, especially when it comes to late-phase, multi-center, and global registration trials. Why? Because developing a new medicine, from lab to label, can cost billions of dollars, require massive infrastructure, and take years of regulatory navigation. Academic institutions and investigators often don't have the resources to carry that burden alone. So while they might conduct early exploratory or observational studies, industry remains the dominant sponsor for most interventional trials, particularly those aimed at regulatory approval. And let's be clear, this isn't just about money. Being a sponsor means taking on a legal and ethical responsibility for participant safety, data quality, regulatory compliance, trial integrity. You can't just sign a check and walk away. As a sponsor, you are accountable for every moving part of the trial, from selecting qualified investigators to handling serious adverse event reporting to maintaining a quality management system that withstands inspection. So when we talk about the sponsor in clinical trials, yes, 80 to 85% of the time we're referring to pharmaceutical companies. But what defines a sponsor is not who they are. It's what they are responsible for. And that responsibility is enormous. But before going further, let's talk about something that's often overlooked in discussions about clinical research: the enormous risk and financial burden that sponsors, especially pharmaceutical companies, carry when they decide to develop a new medicine. You see, bringing a drug from an idea in the lab to a product on the pharmacy shelf is one of the riskiest bets in the business world. We're talking 10 to 15 years of development, thousands of pages of regulatory documentation, and an average price tag of, are you ready for this? $2.6 to $2.8 billion per successful drug, according to data published by the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development, 2016, and updated by Deloitte and PHRMA in recent years. Now you might be thinking, wait, why does it cost so much? Let's break it down. Out of every 10,000 compounds screened in early discovery, only about 250 make it to preclinical testing. Of those, just 5 enter human trials. And in the end, only one drug on average receives approval from regulatory agencies like the FDA or EMA. That's a success rate of around 10% or less for compounds entering phase 1 trials. According to Biomed Tracker and Amplian's 2021 report, the overall likelihood of approval from phase 1 to FDA approval is only 7.9%. Think about that. For every successful medicine we see, dozens, sometimes hundreds, of candidates failed along the way. And yet, the cost of every failed trial is still carried by the sponsor. All the manufacturing, all the site payments, all the monitoring visits, all the regulatory filings, all the safety reports, all the data analysis. Even if the trial ends early or the results don't support approval, it's the sponsor who pays the bill. This isn't just business, it's a massive financial gamble with no guarantees. And that's why the pharmaceutical industry plays such a crucial role in medical advancement. They're not just launching trials, they're investing billions of dollars, absorbing huge risks, and navigating complex regulatory landscapes with the hope that one compound might save lives, relieve suffering, and change the standard of care. So the next time we see a product launch or a phase 3 result, it's worth remembering that outcome didn't happen overnight. It happened because a sponsor decided to carry the weight of uncertainty, cost, and responsibility for years, if not decades. And in doing so, they helped turn science into solutions. Let's now take a closer look at what the sponsor is truly responsible for in a clinical trial. Because the sponsor is not just a silent partner funding the trial from behind the scenes, they're actually the engine driving its design, oversight, and ultimate success. At the center of it, the sponsor is the entity that initiates the clinical trial. It could be a pharmaceutical company, a biotech startup, an academic institution, or even a government body. But once a sponsor initiates a trial, they take on a critical set of responsibilities. And these aren't optional. They're defined under ICH E6R2 and enforced by global regulatory agencies. Let's break it down. Checkmark 1. Designing the trial. The sponsor must design the clinical trial protocol. That means deciding on objectives, methodology, endpoints, study population, timelines, and statistical considerations. Every line in that protocol must be scientifically justified, ethically sound, and aligned with regulatory expectations. If the protocol is weak or unrealistic, the entire trial is at risk. 2. Selecting qualified investigators. We talked about this in detail, but remember, the sponsor must identify investigators who are qualified by education, training, and experience, and who have the infrastructure and support needed to run the trial responsibly. The sponsor must ensure that each investigator is informed of their responsibilities and has formally agreed to them, usually via a signed investigator agreement or contract. 3. Supplying investigational product, IP. The sponsor must ensure that the IP is manufactured, packaged, labeled, and delivered according to applicable good manufacturing practices, GMP, and local regulations. That includes maintaining a chain of accountability, tracking how the drug or device moves from sponsor to site, how it's stored, used, and eventually destroyed or returned. Fourth, monitoring and oversight. The sponsor is responsible for trial monitoring, making sure the study is being conducted according to the protocol, GCP, and all applicable laws. This may be done in-house or outsourced to a CRO, but the sponsor still holds the ultimate responsibility. Monitoring includes site visits or remote monitoring, checking data quality, detecting protocol deviations, and following up on corrective actions. 5. Reporting and submissions. The sponsor must report serious adverse events, SAEs, and suspected unexpected serious adverse reactions, SUSARs, to the relevant authorities and ethics committees, within strict timelines. They're also responsible for submitting regulatory documents, e.g., IND CTA, keeping trial registries updated, and sharing trial results publicly, often through databases or scientific publications. 6. Trial master file, TMF, and documentation. The sponsor must maintain a comprehensive trial master file. This is the central archive of essential documents that allow the trial to be reconstructed and audited at any time. Bear in mind that documentation here is not just a bureaucratic task. It's proof that the trial was run ethically, legally, and scientifically. Now, let's shift to something that underpins everything we just discussed, the Quality Management System, or QMS. Think of it as the trial's operating system. QMS is a set of structured processes, policies, and tools that ensure clinical trials are planned, conducted, and reported in compliance with GCP and applicable regulations, while maintaining participant safety and data integrity. Here's why QMS is so important. 1. It helps sponsors identify and manage risk. QMS requires a proactive approach to identify what could go wrong in a trial early. This is done through risk assessments and risk mitigation planning. Instead of reacting to issues after they occur, a well-functioning QMS helps sponsors prevent problems before they escalate, focus resources on high-risk areas, and stay inspection ready. 2. It ensures consistency across trials and teams. In global multi-site studies, hundreds of people may be working on different parts of the same protocol. A QMS puts standard operating procedures, SOPs, in place so everyone, from clinical research associates to data managers to pharmacovigilance, works in sync. Without this consistency, errors multiply and regulatory consequences follow. 3. It supports training, documentation, and audit readiness. Sponsors must have systems in place to train internal teams and external vendors, maintain clear records of processes and decisions, conduct internal audits to catch gaps, document all findings and corrective actions. These aren't optional. Regulators routinely inspect QMS components to evaluate sponsor oversight and trial conduct. 4. It enables continuous improvement. Quality management systems aren't static, they evolve. Sponsors must regularly review performance metrics, deviations, audit findings, and feedback to learn and adapt. Did the trial face frequent protocol deviations? Did a site consistently delay safety reports? Was the monitoring ineffective in detecting non-compliance? A QMS ensures those lessons aren't wasted. It drives continuous quality improvement, trial after trial, year after year. In short, the sponsor's role is not just to fund or approve the study. It's to own it, from the protocol design to the final report, and to implement a quality management system that protects participants, upholds ethics, and delivers reliable, auditable data. Without that foundation in place, even the most promising clinical trial can crumble under scrutiny. Let's now dive into three core operational responsibilities of the sponsor: risk-based monitoring, investigator selection, and data handling and record keeping. Gone are the days when clinical trial monitoring followed a rigid, site-by-site, 100% source data verification model. That approach was not only resource intensive, it also didn't always catch what really mattered. That's where risk-based monitoring, or RBM, comes in. RBM is a more strategic approach. It focuses on what could go wrong and then builds your monitoring plan around that. So what does that mean in practice? It starts with a risk assessment. The sponsor must identify what aspects of the trial are most critical to participant safety and data reliability. This could include informed consent documentation, randomization processes, safety reporting, or even data entry timelines. Once those risks are identified, the sponsor develops a monitoring plan that addresses them. That plan might include centralized monitoring, reviewing data patterns, queries, or discrepancies remotely. Targeted on-site visits. Instead of visiting every site on a fixed calendar, the sponsor focuses on high-risk sites or those showing early signs of deviation. Key risk indicators, KRIs. These are metrics that help flag issues early, like protocol deviations, high screen failure rates, or delayed data entry. RBM allows for flexibility, smarter resource allocation, and, when done right, actually improves the quality of oversight. But make no mistake, the sponsor is still accountable. Delegating or minimizing site visits doesn't reduce the sponsor's ultimate responsibility for GCP compliance. It simply means they must monitor smarter. Now let's talk about selecting investigators. This might sound straightforward. Find someone experienced and sign them up. But it's more complex than that. Selecting the right investigator is a critical success factor in any clinical trial. Sponsors must ensure that the investigator is qualified by education, training, and experience, has the appropriate time and resources to conduct the trial, operates in a facility equipped to handle the trial requirements, including documentation, safety procedures, and investigational product storage, understands the protocol, the investigational product, and their GCP responsibilities. And just as importantly, the sponsor must confirm that the site has adequate staff who are trained, available, and can maintain the integrity of trial conduct. Remember, an investigator isn't just a data collector. They're a scientific and ethical partner. They make decisions that affect patient safety, study credibility, and ultimately, the approval of the product being studied. The sponsor must document the qualification process, ensure the investigator signs the protocol and investigator agreement, and keep a clear audit trail of the selection process. And now, let's talk about data. In clinical trials, data is everything. Every case report form, every lab value, every adverse event record, it all contributes to the final trial report, which regulators and reviewers rely on to make public health decisions. So how should data be handled? First, the sponsor must ensure that the systems used to capture and store data are validated. Whether it's EDC, electronic data capture, CTMS, clinical trial management systems, or ePro, electronic patient reported outcomes, the systems must be secure, accurate, and compliant with regulations like 21 CFR Part 11 or local equivalents. Next, the sponsor must maintain a clear audit trail. That means any change to data, no matter how minor, must be traceable. Who made the change? When? Why? Was it authorized? Record retention is another key obligation. Essential documents must be retained for the period specified by regulations, often years after the trial ends. And remember, data privacy matters. Sponsors must ensure that trial subject identities are protected at all times. Any data transferred or shared must be de-identified, and appropriate safeguards must be in place for access control, encryption, and data sharing. Ultimately, good data handling practices protect not just the credibility of the research, but the trust of the participants who volunteered for the study. So, let's take a moment to step back and reflect on what we've just explored. We began by defining the sponsor, not just as the financier of a study, but as the central driver of trial quality, integrity, and ethical conduct. Whether that sponsor is a pharmaceutical company, a biotech startup, or even an academic institution, their role is fundamental. We discussed how quality management systems are the backbone of operational excellence, ensuring trials are not only compliant, but also efficient and trustworthy. We unpacked risk-based monitoring, a concept that's reshaping how we oversee trials. Instead of endless site visits and rigid checklists, we're now using intelligent, risk-adapted approaches to focus where it matters most. We talked about the careful selection of investigators, because who runs the trial at the site level can make or break its success. And finally, we covered the importance of data handling and record keeping, the quiet but critical part of research that ensures transparency, traceability, and trust. Now here's the key takeaway. Clinical trials are complex, the risks are high, and the sponsor bears much of that risk, financially, legally, and ethically. But this isn't a solo act. Every investigator, monitor, medical affairs professional, and operations lead, we all contribute to the quality and credibility of the trial. When you understand what sponsors are responsible for, you begin to see how your own actions contribute to the bigger picture. Because in the end, it's not just about approvals, timelines, or data points. It's about patients, those who volunteered to take part in a process that could change their lives or the lives of others. And when we, as clinical research professionals, uphold our roles with clarity and integrity, we honor that trust. Thanks for joining me in this session. Stay curious, stay compliant, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.